Hey everyone, it's Ed Kime from over at Quancha, and in this edition of the Quancha Mailbag, we're going to talk about exiting illiquid positions and avoiding the pattern day trading rules. Let's start off with taking a look at one position in Tesla. This actually came up in a couple different places today, including an email as well as on Reddit, where there was a question about having a deep in the money put and how you could exit it, especially given that it expires one day later, without being able to lose too much to liquidity. Now, in this particular scenario, the investor had opened it early in the morning, so at around 7:75, before the majority of Tesla's bad news for the day had hit. And by the time that happened, when we got close to the end of day, you can see that the option went from being worth about $7 to $8 to being worth about $18 a share. And so that was a big gain for the investor, and they were trying to figure out, how can I make the most out of this trade without losing what I don't have to lose to liquidity? So this breaks down into a few different questions, and I want to cover a couple little details because it can be an important thing to help you just juice out a little bit extra gain on your positions. So the first thing is, we notice here that there is a wide spread, $17.95 to $18.60. So that's 65 cents in the spread. So we kind of consider that to be, if the midpoint was right there as the fair market value, that means you're looking at about 32 cents for the bid or the ask in terms of option liquidity. So we have this broken down for you on the options tab in the portfolio tracker, where you can see the intrinsic value, which is specifically just the value of the option relative to the current price. So if you're struck at 220 on that put and the stock's trading at 202.04, that means you've got $17.96 per share that are in the money, which means you've got a $17.96 intrinsic value. Now, I mentioned earlier that on that spread, for the bid-ask spread, it's 65 cents apart, which means you're looking at 32 cents either way, or 32.5 cents for the liquidity cost of the position. And then finally, the difference between these two and what the actual price of the option is whatever the time value is remaining. So often the time value is going to be just sort of like what that extra value is that makes up the difference between intrinsic and liquidity, because liquidity is always going to work against you, and hopefully the intrinsic is working for you. Obviously, if you're in a long position, that's going to be the case. So in this particular case, what we can see from this is really, because it's $31 in time value and $32 in a liquidity penalty, that means that if you were to close the position using market prices, meaning selling it for the $17.95 that's available, you'd really only be losing $1, or in this case 1 cent per share, because of that $17.96 intrinsic value. So the advice I would have for somebody in this case is, if you want to lock in the trade, you want to lock in the return, maybe split the difference, put it a sell order for limit at the midpoint, and then just work your way down towards the bid to just extract as much value as you can. Odds are, for a spread this wide nearing the end of the day, you'll still be able to get something better than the bid if you have the time to sit there and walk it back. So that would be just my personal approach to investing, is if I want out, I'm going to get out, I'm going to take the money. But there are times when the spread can be so wide and just so thin, given how deep in the money it is, how close it is with 1 day until expiration and a virtual guarantee to expire in the money, that there's not going to be any time value at all. It's going to be pure liquidity cost and then the intrinsic value. In which case, you might want to get a little more clever in how you exit the position. So the book manager is a really good way to dig in and to see different ways that you can go about trying to get some extra value. So this is the current position in blue, which is just that long put struck at 220. And by default, we're looking at tomorrow, because we're looking at the date of the first expiration in your book, which happens to be 1 day away. So the easiest thing to do to get out of a position, and this is usually when you would not even get close to your intrinsic value, is sometimes you might have a lot of options that you're holding. Like, for example, if I was holding 10 long positions here, or rather 10 long options struck at 220, I'd be looking at a lot of value lost for the bid-ask spread. I mean, maybe not a lot, but maybe 10, 100, 1,000. I mean, there's a higher quantity in which it really does start to add up. And the easiest way to lock in your current return there is to just go ahead and to buy shares that match the amount you have. So in this case, if I've got one long put, I could buy 100 shares, probably at market, but ideally with limit order. And that would give me pretty much a flat book going into tomorrow, because the expectation is that at the end of tomorrow, I'm going to get my option will be automatically exercised because it's at least 1 cent in the money, in which case I will be forcing someone else to buy the stock for me at $2.20, and I will have just bought it at this point at $202.04. So I'm locking in $17.96 per share in gain from that transaction. However, I will probably have to pay some kind of exercise or assignment fee depending on which side of the option I'm on. So that's something to keep in mind. Plus, if you're really worried about this big upward movement, if it could be jumping up for a 2-vol move tomorrow and it closes at 225 plus, you're gonna see a bit of a gain, which is nice, but you don't really want to plan for that. Obviously, this would be way better off than just leaving your long put position, and so it's understandable why somebody would want to make their money and get out. But that's the share position, and in this case, it doesn't make any sense. However, the case where it might make sense to do this, and I should back up for a second, was that somebody asked how they could deal with this position without triggering a day trade, because they bought the put earlier in the day, and they didn't want to sell it because of the day trade implications, and therefore, taking this position where you're effectively hedging yourself out of the trade is a pretty effective way of doing it, with of course some risk up here, but it's good kind of risk. So who knows, maybe you get that upside potential. Now let's say you don't have the cash on hand to make a trade like that. You're not just sitting on 20 grand in your account that's free and also simultaneously worried about the pattern day trade rule. So let's go ahead and cancel out that position. And what we'll do instead is we will go and we will add an option where we will sell a put to match this put that we're long. Only we're going to go to the highest strike that's under the strike we have. In this case, it's 217. So we're going to sell that 217 put, or 217.50, right below the 220 we're long. And what this will give us is a spread. And again, we're looking at the yellow is the modeled book for the changes we've made, and the blue is the original book. And we can see here, again, because of the fact that there is $1 in time value, apparently, in being able to sell this option at being able to receive $15.45 for it, that gives us $1 in time value, and therefore it cancels out the dollar we would lose, and we are looking at a portfolio impact of 0. Or in this case, the 0 would be because the expectation here is that if the stock closes at or below 1750, what's going to happen is your long leg will be automatically assigned, and you will buy you will force somebody to buy 100 shares from you at 220, and your short leg will be automatically assigned on you, meaning that you will then be forced to buy 100 shares at 217.50. So you sold them at 220, bought them at 217.50. So you'll make a little bit of cash there as a part of the locked-in process. But the key thing, the most important thing, is that your P&L looks like this. So if it's anything below 217.50, the only real difference that's not accounted for here is going to be the exercise and assignment fees that you get hit by your brokerage with. Now, again, because of how small this number is, it doesn't make sense for a single option on each side. But if you're dealing in the hundreds or thousands of options, then yes, you pay the $5, $7, $9, whatever it happens to be on each side, and it's definitely worth that trade. Now, if you wanted to get a little bit more aggressive, like if you were holding on to this bear sentiment and you said, hey, I'd like to still see what I can do about maybe juicing a little extra cash out. Like, I don't think it's going to go down much further, but, maybe you're feeling a little, you're definitely not bullish on the stock at all. And you say, in the next day, starting off at 202, it's not going to close over 210. Maybe instead of this 217 one, let's use the roll option here, and we'll look at the expiration list and say, maybe do the 210s instead of the 217s. So now when you sell the 210, there's actually some time value that's baked into that, even if you sell it at the market offer. At which point you'd actually see about a $75 difference versus what you're currently holding. Because remember, this book, the book manager's P&L projection shows you relative to the current holdings. So this isn't saying your overall trade results. It always looks at where you are right now and what the results would be. So you'd be able to lock that in. Now, of course, by sliding that strike down, what you're doing is you're opening yourself up for potential loss if the stock were to move back up. So in this particular case, we would see there's that 925 portfolio impact. And what that means is that you would lose $925 worth of the value you currently have in the book. But since the position's currently up over $1,000, you'd still be locking in a relatively minor gain. I mean, you'd still probably make a good 15 or 20% on the position open Thursday by the time things closed on Friday. But But again, if you're convinced that you're going to see no higher than 210, this could be a better position to go in, because not only are you going to be able to close out both of those positions through the assignment/exercise, but you're also able to juice a little bit of time value out of it by selling that short position closer to the money. And of course, the closer you get, you'll be able to sell more and more. So if, for example, you were even more aggressive and you figured, hey, I want to get out of this position, but it would be neat if I took the expiration option, I went down to 200, which is even a little bit out of the money. Now, it's a little risky there, but there's a lot more cash at hand, because you could potentially squeeze out an extra nearly $500 on the trade. But again, this is really all about your risk reward and your view of the market, and really the appetite that you have for being able to take on some of this additional risk if you want it to go lower. And of course, what the structure is for the scale of the trade you're in, and the implications of the assignment and exercise fees from your brokerage. But this was a quick look at how you can get out of a position that might be illiquid by maybe squeezing a little bit extra cash out of it and by taking on some more risk, or by just going along with the shares in order to be able to get out of it without having to activate PDT or take on any additional risk for the vast majority of potential movement in this stock. So as always, if you have any questions, please submit it to us at hello@quantya.com, and good luck and good hunting.